Science. At times it can be a little dry, so it's no surprise that scientists aren't exactly seen in the same light as celebrities. However, the man we will talk about today shook the world of science and subsequently religion to its core. Charles Darwin is a name recognised throughout our modern world, from laboratories to biologists to the most scientifically illiterate among us. Darwin is known for his contributions towards our understanding of evolution and his book on the origin of species. However, in today's video we're going to take a look at some of the weird facts you didn't know about Charles Darwin. He was born February 12, 1809. Now this date may sound familiar to some history buffs out there, and that's because this is the same day facial hair and really tall hat aficionado Abraham Lincoln was born. Although they may have both entered this world on the same day, their beginnings couldn't have been more different. See, while the man that was destined to become the 16th President of the United States of America, old Honest Abe, was being born in a log cabin in the Kentucky wilderness, across the Atlantic, Darwin was being born in a grand Georgian house on an estate overlooking the River Spen and the medieval market town of Shrewsbury, England. And although these men were born worlds apart, they would go on to share the same views upon the evil act of slavery. Although Darwin might be commonly known in the modern age for his groundbreaking work in the field of evolution, it wasn't always this way. See, as a young man, Darwin actually wanted to be a doctor, following in his father's footsteps, and in the summer of 1825, he served as his father's apprentice before enrolling in the University of Edinburgh, one of Britain's finest medical schools. But this life wasn't exactly a good fit for old Charlie. See, Darwin couldn't stand the sight of blood, not exactly an enduring trait for a 19th century surgeon. He also grew quite bored with his lectures, and soon had dropped out of medical school completely, much to his father's dismay. Darwin's education didn't end with his failed attempts to become a doctor like his father. No, Charles would go on to enrol at Cambridge University, and surprisingly this time it wasn't for something you'd usually associate with Darwin. See, before he would go on to change the views at the time surrounding creationism and how we became human, Charles himself would study theology, and while some of his thoughts around faith may have changed throughout the years, at the time it was something he fully believed, even going on to write of his time, "I did not then, in the least, doubt the strict and literal truth of every word in the Bible." Darwin was known to be a very logical man, a man who would always weigh his options before making a final decision. So it comes as no surprise that he did the same when deciding to take a wife. When he was faced with the decision of marrying his future wife Emma Winwood, Charles would make two lists, one with a heading marry and the other reading not marry. In the marry list there was sound reasoning as children, constant companion, better than a dog anyhow, and someone to take care of the house. Whilst the list titled not marry, he would state conversation of clever men at clubs, loss of time, and freedom to go where one liked, because every man needs their freedom. Charles would ultimately decide to marry Emma. However, there is one thing Darwin would suspiciously leave out of his cons list: the fact that his new bride-to-be was also his first cousin. We now see Darwin as a vast fountain of knowledge, and a trailblazer in the understanding and protecting of our wildlife. But something that may surprise you is that Darwin actually dined on the flesh of a lot of the animals he would find. Charles' obsession with the strange eating habit started in university, where he joined the Glutton Club, a club devoted to devouring birds and beasts, which were before unknown to the human palate. They would try meats from many different animals, including hawk and bittern, a type of heron. His hunger for the flesh of weird and exotic animals would be quelled by a brown owl, a meat so bad Darwin would go on to call its flavour indescribable. This experience, however, did not deter him from wanting to try many other animals, and on his travels aboard the HMS Beagle, he would eat animals from all around the world, including, during his stay on Galapagos, Darwin ate iguanas and giant tortoises. He enjoyed their meat so much, he would collect 48 of them to be put aboard the Beagle and to be eaten throughout the journey home. After returning home from his 5-year journey around the world in 1836, Darwin didn't immediately publish his findings. He was concerned about how his new theories would be taken by the church and the wider public. The people had faith in their God and in their Bible. It would be hard to share his ideas with anybody, let alone a world steeped in religious belief. So for now, Charles would shelf his ideas. It wasn't until he met British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, more on him later, that he would be convinced it was time to release his findings to the world. So in 1858, over 20 years after his voyage had ended, he announced his theory of evolution, and the following year Charles would publish his famous work on the origin of species by the means of natural selection. In the last entry in our list, we spoke about Alfred Russel Wallace. He was a contemporary of Darwin and hot on the heels of the great man himself. He would come to a similar conclusion on natural selection and how life diversified around the world. Without Mr. Wallace, things could have been very different. We could have lost Darwin's work to the annals of history, and it could have been years, if not longer, until we would unearth these groundbreaking discoveries. Both men would go on to be honoured by the Linnean Society of London, but Darwin was the one that ended up getting much of the credit for the idea. The phrase, survival of the fittest, is often attributed to Charles Darwin and his writings on natural selection. However, the phrase was originally used by English philosopher Herbert Spencer in his 1864 work, Principles of Biology, where he connected Darwin's theories on the natural world into the realm of sociology, ethics, and economics. Darwin would, however, go on to use the phrase in his 5th edition of The Origins of Species, published in 1869, giving Herbert Spencer full credit, stating, "The expression often used by Mr. Herbert Spencer of survival of the fittest is more accurate and is sometimes equally convenient." Sadly, Darwin's life ended on April 19, 1882. His family had plans to lay the body to rest in the village that Darwin called home for the most of the last 4 decades of his life. However, some of Darwin's friends and contemporaries had a different idea. They began to lobby so the great man could have a fitting burial in London's Westminster Abbey. Newspapers and the public alike joined the sea of voices calling for a fitting resting place for such an amazing man. The Dean in charge of Westminster at the time, George Granville Bradley, agreed, and a week after his death, in the most spectacular church in England, alongside revolutionary scientists John Herschel and Isaac Newton, Darwin found his final resting place. Though his ideas shook the world of religion like a 6-year-old shakes a snow globe, Darwin never fully lost his faith. However, it did waver as the years went on. He drifted away from a belief in God. Never did he call himself atheist, only agnostic. A man of science till the very end, never dismissing an idea he couldn't disprove, even if the church did everything in their power to dismiss him. It wasn't until 126 years after his death that the church would apologise, saying, "Charles Darwin, 200 years from your birth, the Church of England owes you an apology for misunderstanding you and, by getting our first reactions wrong, encouraging others to misunderstand you still. We try to practice the old virtues of faith-seeking, understanding, and hope that makes some amends. But the struggle for your reputation is not over yet. And the problem is not just your religious opponents, but those who falsely claim you in support of their own interests. Good religion needs to work constructively with good science, and I dare suggest that the opposite may be true as well."